Okay. Okay. So let's maybe start at the top. We were talking about the mitzvah Lamed Gimel, the mitzvah of the Vishas Bigdi Kehuna. We pointed out that the Ramban it expresses or sets forth to us the sheet of the Bahag, and the Bahag doesn't count it. Ramban suggests two reasons. Either it's only Hakdoma, and according to Shirish 10, a Hakdoma to a mitzvah, even though it's a tzivui, is not minyan mitzvahs, or it's according to Shirish Beis, it's part of the Seder of Avodah, and the Seder Avodah begins with the Vishas Bigdi Kehuna. However, even though the Ramban comes to the Bahag and comes as a Melech Yosha, he himself does not count the minyan mitzvahs because he doesn't in his minyan shesilik hagav shesilik minyan hagav. Ramban does not count mitzvah Lamed Gimel. So Ramban agrees with the Ramban. Okay, good. Point one. Point two. The Ramban adds over here shistavu HaKohanim lubosh begodim miuchodim lechovo v'seferes, which is a very interesting thing. Why is he talking about lechovo v'seferes over here? So, what the simple way of learning it is that the Rambam disagrees with the Bahag and says the Sept kiyum in Levishas Bigdi Kehuna, independent of Avodah. And he's saying of the kiyum lechovo v'seferes. And the Rambam in the Vuchim clearly says the lechovo v'seferes is a kiyum mikdash. In Chelek Gimel, Perek Mem Hey, he says, HaMitzvos asher kol al oisom haklal o asiri heim asher sifonim b'hilchos beis b'chira b'hilchos klei hamikdash v'oivnim boy u'b'hilchos beis hamikdash. And he says u'michlal advorim hameviim lahagdil hamikdash u'lefa'aroi ad sheyagia yira mimenu. So that's one. It's you beautify the mikdash in order to help for yira. Yira's hamikdash. V'tzivo, and I'm skipping a little bit. V'tzivo lahalbish hakohanim begodim noim umalbushim yofim. And what difference the two is? Yofim v'tevim bigdei kodesh lechovo v'seferes. And what he's doing is, this is another kiyum of lahadroi ulefoye lechoveres hamikdash, and that's what the Lev Sameach also points out. Okay, so you understand this is good in a situation of Kohen Gadol, because the Kohen Gadol can wear the Bigadi even b'shas avodah. So there's a kiyum lechovo v'seferes. But in Bigdi Kohen Hedyot, the Ram Shita is that he's only allowed b'shas avodah. Shelo b'shas avodah, the Ram's Shita is there's an Issa of Shatnez. So if that's true, maybe there's no lechovo v'seferes. So you have to say according to the Ram, even though it's a little odd, is that if he's not a Kohen Shebemikdash, if he's not wearing Bigdi Kehuna, there's no lechovo v'seferes. It's not stamped to wear the begodim. And for some reason, he assumes that the whole portion, the lechovo v'seferes, for a Kohen Hedyot is only b'shas avodah. Now, let's just bring two rayas for two additional rayas to the Rambam that that there's a separate kiyum of Bigday, Rish's Bigday Kuna. We just pointed out that they cover the Seferis, okay, and that the Rambam here clearly says, and that explains that there's a kiyum in the Levisha, independent of Avodah. And the other two is the following: the Parsha. The Rambam says, "B'chov Seferis, goes out of Mikdash, vu Amra Yis'ale, v'Asisa Shmois Chavches Beis, v'Asisa Bigdei Kodesh, li'Aaron Ochicha, l'chov Seferis." And then in Shmos Chavtes Ches, v'Es Bigdei as Bonov Takriv, v'Ilbashtom Ksonis, Kutonis. So, this parsha, and probably it's the whole parsha, is talking about Moshe Rabbeinu making the Kohanim into Kohanim, the Kiyun are Kohanim. In this parsha, Aaron and Bonov are not doing any avodah. All they're basically doing is wearing B'gadim. The one who's being oived during Shiur Yimei HaMiluyim is Moshe Rabbeinu. So, l'chera, to say that the Levisha of the Begodim is only the Hechsher Avodah or in couple with Avodah doesn't make any sense in this parsha. The Rambam, at the end of this mitzvah, quotes the following. He's talking about Kohen Gadol, and he says, he says that it's the Shema, whatever it is, whatever reason he's doing it, Shetziva Hashem Yis'ala LeMoshe Levad, V'hu Sheyilbash Elu Begodim Hamid B'Mikdash. The Kohen Gadol should be constantly wearing the Shmona Begodim. Now, what does it mean? I feel a shloi b'shas avodah. So I heard from Rebbe, he said that since there's a kiyum levisha in the Bigday Kohen Gadol, independent of avodah, there's no isa klayim in Levisha's Bigday Kahuna Gedoyla b'Mikdash. The Rambam, you should look, the Rambam Hilchos Klayim Perek Yud Halacha Yud Beis, and the Raiv is there. Then there's a Shas Tshuva Shagasai Yishonos Simon Chavtes, Shas Tshuvas Beis Halevi Chelik Aleph Simon Aleph, talking more about Ritzui Tzitz. The Rav said the Etzim Levisha from all the big Dekuna Gdol is a kiyum. And Abchaim, in Pir Shmuel and Nida, Samach Aleph from an Aleph, tries to make a case that there might not be shotness at all in Bigdi Kohen Gadol. But that's not of interest to us. But if you're working with this assumption that there is shotness, which all the others work with except for Chaim, then l'chera you have to say something. And what the Rav suggested is that the Etzem Levisha is a kiyum, and this would fit in what the Rav is doing over here. And interesting that the covenant seferis of the Kohen Gadol is always independent of Avodah, and the covenant seferis of the Kohen Hedyot is only b'shas Avodah. Say it. Now, the Ram says, he shenitztavu hakohanim the lubeish begodim yuchodim lechover sefaros. Okay. Now, it's very clear over here that the mitzvah is levisha. Okay. The Ram doesn't talk here about Aseh. Not at all. However, the Pasuk seems to say that the Ram quotes V'yosisa bigdei kodesh li'aron ochicha l'chol v'sefaros. So the Pasuk seems to clearly say there's a mitzvah of levisha, of Aseh. So, and the Ram doesn't talk about Aseh over here. All he talks about is levisha. So, the Ram says the levisha is only Hakdama, and the Rambam in the Shoshim, in Shiur Yud, says you don't talk about Hakdamas. That l'chayr is very simple and very good. However, the interesting thing is, okay, well, just 1 second. And in Protei Mitzvos, it's also like that. Lubeish in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash v'Oivnim Boy, Lubeish Bigdi Kehuna L'Avodah. So it means the mitzvah is only levisha, and Aseh is not in the mitzvah as it's Akdama. But the Rambam in the halachas proper, and Hilchos Klei HaMikdash v'Oivnim Boy, mitzvah say la'aseis begodim elu v'liyos akoyen oived bohen. La'aseis begodim elu v'liyos akoyen oived bohen. Shenema v'yosisa bigdei kodesh v'yezbon of takri v'lbashim kutonos. So he quotes the exact same psukim, but he says that both of the psukim are part of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah Aseh and levisha. Not like he's expressing over here in Minyan Mitzvahs, and not like the Protei Mitzvahs. The Ram again is learning as a mitzvah Aseh from the psukim. Now, that's not, very convincing, but that's what he's doing. But, you could have said it's only Akdama. So let's start over here, and just an interesting observation. The Rambam, excuse me, the Parshas in there's a Seder Parshas over here, and that the Parshas, the topic of the Parshas are Binyan HaMikdash v'Kelov. Okay, and after the Torah tells you about Binyan HaMikdash v'Kelov, the tzivuyim about bigday kahuna in Parshas Tetzaveh, Shmos Chavches Beis, v'sisa bigday kodesh li'aron ochicha l'chov v'sivores. And afterwards, there's a Parsha Aseh Shemen HaMishcha u'Kteres in Parshas Kisisa, Shmos Lamed Chavhei, v'yosisa bigday v'yosisa as Shemen HaMishchas Kodesh loikach mirkachas maaseh loikeach Shemen Mishchas Kodesh he Shem Mishchas yiyeh. And then in Shmos Lamed Hey v'yosisa oisa kiteres loikach maaseh loikeach memulach toho Kodesh. And that's in the Tzivui. Also in the Aseh, he puts them all together in the Seder, in the Aseh HaMishkan. And in the Caleb, then he says, he has, you have Bigday Kahuna, Shemen HaMishcha, and Keteres as part of Aseh HaMishkan. Shemen HaMishcha, Keteres HaSamim in Parshas Vayakel. Right after he talks about V'ya'aseh Zabadim, Atzei Shitim, Vayitzaf Oisom Zohov, Vayas, Es Shemen HaMishcha, Kodesh was Keteres HaSamim, Kod Toho, Maaseh L'keach, and Bigday Kahuna in Parshas Pekudei in the Aseh. In Shmos Lamed Ches, Lamed Aleph and Lamed Tes Aleph. V'es Adnei Achotze Soviv, v'es Adnei Shar Achotze, which is the Aseh HaMishkan. V'es Kol Yisleis HaMishkan, v'es Kol Yisleis Achotze Soviv. U'min HaTcheles v'Agoma M'tolav V'Salas HaShoni. Asu Bigday Srod, L'shois B'Kodesh, v'Asus Bigday HaKodesh, Asher Li'aron, Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. So it means the Torah, for some reason, puts the Aseh Shemen HaMishcha and the Aseh HaKteres and the Aseh Bigday Kahuna together in the Tzivui from Aseh HaMishcha V'Keilah and in the Aseh itself, which is very odd. These, the Rambam formulates all of these, and before the Rambam, all of these, the Lashon Aseh is an Aseh by Shemen HaMishcha, Aseh by Keteres, and Aseh by Bigday Kahuna. So it's very nice that you have this parsha. The question is, what are they dealing? What's the issue that the Rambam over here seems to say that it's a plain akdama, and the Rambam in Mishnah Torah is putting it as part of the mitzvah. So the interesting thing is, in these parshas, there are some things which are the deires, and some things which are horashah. And especially in the parsha Bigday Kahuna, especially in the parsha Bigday Kahuna, as Biskarov points out in his Pirush HaChumash in Bamidbar, at the end of Parshas Bamidbar, and the fact it says we're confused. What's a Rasha and what's a Mitzvah L'Deires? So once you do that, maybe the Rambam learns that not only in Leviticus but in Sefer Mitzvas, that the Asiyah in all these parshas are Harashah, not only in Asiyas Bigdi Kehuna, but Nasiyas Shemen HaMishcha and Asiyas Kteres. And the Ram over here learns that all these Asiyas are, the Ram in Mishnah Torah, where he quotes Asiyah, he learns that all these are part of the mitzvah. They're not a Roshah. Maybe it's a double poshut that the whole idea of Akdoma is only a mitzvah deres. A mitzvah shah doesn't. That's the mitzvah. The whole thing is the mitzvah. So maybe that since the parsha is both Shah and a mitzvah deres, and you have Akdoma, the same way it's not Akdoma in the Shah, it's not Akdoma in the mitzvah deres. That's another way of doing it. But whatever it is, these parshas are different, that they're part of the Asiyas HaMishkan. And maybe, and that itself might give it that the Etzem Asiyah is a kiyum, since in the Harashah is certainly kiyum again. So maybe in the mitzvah deres, it also should be because of the same Asiyah. Maybe with this, you understand the Rav Mishnah Torah does an amazing thing. Puts the Asiyas Hakteres, and he says the Asiyas Hakteres is a mitzvah Aseh, and he has a mitzvah Aseh of Hakteres Hakteres. He quotes in Hilchos Tmidim Musafim, in Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph, mitzvah Aseh lahakte Hakteres al Mizbach Hazav. And the Asiyas Hakteres in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash. In Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, Oivni boy, Perek Beis Halacha Aleph, Hakteres Nasis b'chol shana v'shana v'asiyosim mitzvahs aseh shenema v'ata kachel chosamim. The Rambam only quotes it in the Protei Mitzvah Chosvin B'Safim, not in the Klei HaMikdash, because it really is only one mitzvah. But on the other hand, it's not just a Hakdama. And if it would be a Hakdama, it's a double portion that its place should have been in Hilchos Tmidim Musafim together with Haktaras Haktaris. And the Rambam goes out of his way to quote it separately because it is not Hakdama for whatever reason we mentioned before. And there's a mitzvah of Asiyah. And in Bigdi Kehuna, it's also not Akdama. Whether it's because the Harashah, the whole idea of Akdama doesn't apply, and it certainly there was elements of Harashah and mitzvah, whatever way you like it, but the fact that he quotes The Asiyas HaKteris in a separate place, in Mitzvas, is going out of his way to stress that it's not Akdoma. Okay. Next. Interesting, in Mishnah Torah, by Bigdi Kehuna, the Ram has the following lashon. In Perek Yud Halacha Daled of Hilchos Klei HaMikdash V'Oivdim Boy. The Ram says, Mitzvas la'aseis begodim elu v'liyois hakohen oived bohem. La'aseis v'liyois hakohen oived bohem. Shenema v'yosisa b'gdi kodesh as Aaron ubonav takri v'ilbashtom kutonos. The Rambam, this lashon of lihiyos is an interesting lashon, and he uses this lihiyos also in the meaning of mitzvah kotzer. In mitzvah selam agimu lihiyos hakohanim lobshim la'avoda bigdi kehuna shenema v'yosisa bigdi kodesh. So, what does he want with lihiyos? And what I would suggest is he wants to say with lihiyos that the mitzvah is not the Maisa Levisha, the mitzvah is he should be lavush with the begadim. As you remember, we pointed out in the mitzvah Mishmores that every time the Rambam uses the word bikon in Sefer Mitzvos, in Mishnah Torah, in the Minyan HaKotzer, the mitzvah is clearly lihiyos. Lihiyos, to be in the matzav, to be in the state of. And here also, the mitzvah is to be in the state of Levish's Bigdi Kehuna, v'lihiyos. Here, he's not presenting that. Here he says, he's the one Shiur HaKohanim Oivdim. He says, Shesivu HaKohanim Lilbosh Begodim. So it's very clear here that the mitzvah is not lihiyos, but the mitzvah is lilbosh. So it's a double portion that the mitzvah and l'chseira, even though you would have wanted to say in the Rambam that the mitzvah is lilbosh and not to be where the Bigdi Kehuna. However, you have to say that Levisha is a kiyuma mitzvah. Because if you don't say that, we don't understand what the heter of Kohen Hedjit Levisha Shatnis, of Avnei Chel Shatnis, B'Shas Avoda. And it must be that as he's wearing the begodim, there's a mitzvah, and the mitzvah says the cholaisis there. And that's the Ram says in Perek Yud of Hilchos Klayim Halacha Lamed Beis. Kohanim shelofshu bigdei kehuna sheloi b'shas avoda afilu b'mikdosh loikin mibnei ha'avnei shu klayim v'loi hutru boi el b'shas avoda. And then the next shehi el b'shas avoda shehi Mitzvas Aseh kitzitzis. The Levisha tzitzis, if you're wearing Klayim b'tzitzis, is a kiyum in the Levisha when you're wearing it. And the Bigdi Kahuna, there's a kiyum also when you're wearing it. Now, there's a Machlokes Achronim, which we alluded to before, which mitzvah is mate klayim. We were talking before about which mitzvah in Kohen Gadol is matir. Now the question is, which mitzvah in Kohen Hedjit? The Shagis Aye in Simon Chav Tes says that the mitzvah which is matir Isa Klayim is avodas hakorban. The Ochlaner in Yevomis quotes it, and it's Deicha the Shagasaye, and he holds that the Aseh of Levisha's Bigdi Kahuna is the Deicha of the Isa Klayim. You understand yourself that the proof that Levish is a mitzvah is only if you go like Chaneh. If you say like the Shagasai, it's not a proof that there's a mitzvah in Levish. Now, the problem with the Ochaneh, to be frank with you, the Rambam does something which I didn't talk about, and it's an interesting thing. The Rambam there's a Seder in Levish's Bigdi Kahuna, which the truth is, makes a lot of sense if the mitzvah is the Ma'aseh Levisha, there's a Seder in the Ma'aseh Levisha. It's interesting that there's a mitzvah, there's a Seder, and the mitzvah is to be lobush. Okay. The question is, if the mitzvah is that the kohen should be lobush bigdei kehuna, and that's what's matan klayim, so we don't understand, because the Seder Levisha, the Ma'aseh Levisha, of Kohen Hedjit and Kohen Gadol, is like this. He says, Keitzad Seder Levishas habegodim, lobish mechnasayim tchilo, v'choiges ha-mechnasayim l'mayla metiburoi, mi'al tzavo, mi'al mosnov, v'achach loivesh ha-ketonis, v'ige es ha'avneit, kineged atzile yodam makifoi, klach al klach, ad shegoyim b'kosher. v'chulei. But he's not finished. He wore the Michnasayim, and he wore the Ketonis, and he put on the Avnei. But his hat is not on yet. Biskurov, and the question is, so if the mitzvah is matir, so l'chayri is, how do you put it on? L'chayri, the vishas avnei should have been at the end. However, maybe adarabah. There's a lashon over here. Let's just read again from the beginning. Lubosh habagodim mithisha tzivonu. Hisha ditztavo hakohanim lilbosh begodim miuchodim lechovod v'sefores. V'oz yavdu b'mikdash. Now here, in Ibn Tibon and Ibn Yov is v'oz v'achakach. Okay, v'achakach in Kapach. So, look, you see, I'm not sure how bad anything is, because Lamaisa is, he's lovish before the Avodah, and you require Be'idna. So, l'cheira, when the Kohen puts it on before the Avodah, there should have been a problem of shatnez. You know, the same way I asked about the Seder Levisha, you could ask over here. But here, it's not so bad. Because maybe the Rambam is saying over here, Mirchodim v'oz yavdu b'mikdash, that Levisha, l'tzoch hakrova, is a mitzvah. And even before you do the avodah, but after you finish the avodah, to take it off. But if he's putting it on to oiv it immediately, the Etzel Levish is also kiyum. The oz. So then, if that's the case, there's no problem about beidna, because he wears the begadim and then he's oived. But that takes care of the general case of Levish's bigdei kehuna, that he has it on and then he's oived and he's still no isik klayim. But when you get to the problem of wearing the avneit before he has his hat on, there's no kiyum. And the Ram says that the Levish is bigdei kehuna like tzitzis. It's the kiyum. So the question is there kiyum over here? Doesn't, you know, the question, what's going on? What's the heter? So that's why I asked the question over here. But l'chera, before is a chiddush. That he should be melubush, bigdei kehuna, and then he's oived. Now, next. Lubush begodim yuchodim. Okay. Is begod, okay. Here, I just want to tell you something. There's something very interesting over here. there's a word in one of the Tilgumim which is not in the other ones. So here, let's go to this. Is Lubosh, we have Lubosh Begodim, Miuchodim, Lechovoid, Visiferes, or Lechovu Seferes. That is something like, that's Ibn Tibin and Kapach. However, Ibn Eoiv has something new. There's a indefinite pronoun reference. We know what it refers to. Lilbosh begodim miuchodim lechovoid lohem uleseferes. So who is lechovoid seferes? It's for the Kohanim, which you don't get the impression like that in the Moreh Nevuchim, where it's the lechovoid seferes of Mikdash. And besides everything else, so you say, oh, it's a steal, the Ram was there, Moreh Nevuchim was later, and this, that. But the interesting thing is that it's a steal minei bein Rambam. Because the Rambam at the end of this mitzvah says, quotes a Sifra, Minayin shein Aaron loivish begodel legdulosai el k'makayim gzeres hamelch. He's not wearing the begodim lechov the seferis for himself, but it's makayim the mitzvah. So besides the Moreh Nevuchim, no, but he says himself in obey. So, maybe the Ram, and there's no, you don't know where the word came from. Maybe the Ram corrected it. This is an earlier thing. But still, we don't understand what Mameko Maksova. Okay, say them. Next. So, the Rambam does something, and just want to tell you what he's doing. And I alluded to it before, maybe I said it, but I just want to say it clear here. The Rambam in quotes the beginning of the discussion in the Torah about the Bigdi Kehuna, Vesisa Bigdi Kodesh Li'aron Ochicha L'chov L'Seferes, and then he quotes the last pasuk, V'esbon of Takriv V'ilbashtom Kutonos. But the Rambam is saying L'cheret means V'chule, it means everything else in between. He quotes the first pasuk and the last pasuk. And it's the whole Pasha, which is Aseh in the midst of Levish's Bigdi Kehuna, the Aaron Levonov. And he does the same thing in Mishnah Torah. She quotes the beginning of the Pasha and the end of the Pasha. In Hilchos Klei HaMikdash V'Oivnei Boy, in Perek Yud, Alochadal Mitzvah Say, La'aseh Begodim, Elu V'liyos HaKohen Oived Bohem, Shenema V'Yisisa Bigdei Kodesh, V'Yesbon of Takriv V'Ilbashtom Kutonos. So there's no such pasuk. He says, he says, V'Yisisa Bigdei Kodesh, V'Yesbon of Takriv V'Ilbashtom. So there's no such pasuk. It's a combination of two psukim. The pasuk V'Yisisa Bigdei Kodesh, the beginning, which is the pasuk in the Hili Parsha, V'Yesbon of Takriv V'Ilbashtom, which is the pasuk at the end of the Parsha. Okay, good. There's nothing, just plain reading of what the Rambam says. Now, Okay. Then the Ram says something which we don't know exactly what happened. He says, V'elu hein bigde kahuna. V'elu hein bigde kahuna. Shmona begodim l'kohen gadol v'arba l'kohen hedit. Now here also, the Ibn Iyuv has an extra word, but here we understand what the word is. He says, "There's born of takriv v'lbashtem kutonos." He's quoting the pasuk for the mitzvah, and then he says like this: "V'zeis he mitzvahs bigdei kahuna." He said, "This is the mitzvah." Or the Elohim, because the Elohim bigdei kahuna we don't understand. He's telling you what the begodim are. So he's telling you, "Zeis he mitzvahs bigdei kahuna," that the bigdei kahuna of kohen hedyet. And the Kohen Gadol Shmona begodim, Kohen Hedit 4 begodim, that's the mitzvah. And you can go a step further, and the Ram is trying to tell you there are 2 different ways to Mekayim the mitzvah. The Kohen Gadol is Mekayim the mitzvah with the vicious bigdei kahuna gedolah, and the Kohen Hedit is Mekayim the mitzvah with the vicious bigdei Kohen Hedit. Rav Sadi going in his Minyan HaMitzvos, which was recently published, Magniza, in Perek Yudalid, V'asiyas shmona begodol l'kohen gadol, l'kohen hagadol, choishin v'avnei l'mitznefes v'tzitz, k'fi ma shebia teo kol beged yoko, k'fi shen she'oma v'eila ha'begodim. So the mitzvah is asiyas ha'begodim. But l'cheira, what's happening is, it's not like Kilu, something new happened over here. This is of Sadiq that always, in many Mekoimis in Sefer Mitzvah Shaloi, is the mitzvah is the Akdoma. But he means everything afterwards also. And he's just stressing that he disagrees with Shorish Asiri. He holds that Akdoma is part of the mitzvah. In the mitzvah lechem aponim, the mitzvah is afiyah, according afiyah shtei also kikos. He doesn't say it's the seder ha lechem al shulchan. In the mitzvah of shema lamoor, of menorah, of alokas menorah, he says yeh shema lamoor, and he doesn't say alokas menorah. And the mitzvah of kteres, he says the mitzvah is the kteres, not the aktorah of the kteres. And maybe he actually is going out of his way to murder the mitzvah from the first pula you start. And it's the Asiyas Kteres. And they should be shemen in the mikdash for the more, for the menorah, and the afia of the shtei asakalos of lechem upon him. Now, the Rambam goes into a new thing here, and we don't know what happened. He just said that this is not only to tell you what is the mitzvah Shmona begodim for Kohen Gadol and Arba begodim for Kohen Hedit. It's a hakdama for discussion, which we have to understand. Why does the Rambam quote it here? The Rambam says like this: בפוחס מהבגודים שהם מיוחדים בעבודה ההיא או ביועס מהן, או ביועס מהן, avoid the psula. So he's saying that there is a pasmus in the avoida of mechusa begodim, miyuta begodim. So the question is, it's very nice that there's a pasmus, but what does it have to do? What does it have to do with this mitzvah? As we always say, the prote mitzvah, it's mekoimoi, is in Mishnah Torah, but not over here. It's just details of the mitzvah. And then he goes on, he says, v'chayiv im zeh, or that's in Ibn Tibin and Ibn Iyoi, or chayiv im kach, misa b'dei shamayim, what's lo mechusa begodim she'obad. So mechusa begodim is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. V'chein manu b'gmor Sanhedrin. On page Gimel Omen Aleph. B'chlal mechuyvei misa b'dei shamayim. He says, v'loi bo b'zeh kosev b'biur. There's no mefurish posik that is a chiv misa b'dei shamayim in mechusa begodim or miyuta begodim. Avo bo akosuv v'chogarto isam avneit v'hoysa lehem kahuna ubo b'feirish a pirush makubo ubo pirush. Love to see what this is. Bizman shebigdeim aleim kunasam aleim ein bigdeim aleim ein kunasam aleim v'havalu zorim. V'hine nevayer ki zar sheshimesh b'misa, because this is based on v'chagarta oisam avneit v'hoisa lehem kahuna. So he's a kohen with a kohen shel mikdash with the levisha. And bisman shebigdeim aleim kunasam aleim. And if it's ain't kunas aleim, v'havalu kazarim. So it's a double portion that it's not the pshat the Ram is trying to say that he's a zar, because if he says that he's a zar and it's really under the isa of zarus, so that it's just that there's a limud between zarus and bigdei kehuna that the person doesn't wear bigdei kehuna is dinner kazak. The question is, the question is the pshat that he's chayiv misdei shamayim because he violates the aseh of the vicious bigdei kehuna? That's very difficult to maintain because the Ram only has two cases with his misdei shamayim, Mishnah Torah clearly, with his misdei shamayim, where there's only an aseh, not a lav. And that is Shelo Rochas Yadayim Vaglayim, and all the dinim of Kovish Nevuah, all the dinim of Oiva Divi Kovish Nevuah, Oiva Divi Atzmai. is Mitzvah Shemayim. He doesn't quote. The same way Zah is a Chiyuv Misa because of a lav, he says, the Mechus Begodim, yes, Begodim is also Chiyuv Misa a lav. So, if it's because of a lav, so what in the world does it have to do with this mitzvah? The mitzvah is about the Aseh. So why is he talking so much? Was will him? What does he want? Okay. So, Amid Hashem, look at Tesa Yuma on Hamer Bays. See, the Torah quotes Achim Shamayim. But there's another pasuk in the Torah. The Ram is called the Ram quotes of Midrasha. And the Gemara, the pasuk of the Torah is V'hoyel Aaron v'Arbona b'voyim el oil moed o begisham al mizbeach l'shoris b'kodesh v'lo yisu ovoin v'meisu chukas olam lo l'zal achov. So the Rambam, the Torah says the Chai Misa Shemayim from a foolish pasuk. The Rambam here quotes the Drasha. So this also we have to deal with. So Mitzvah Hashem next week. No, next week there won't be a shiur, I think. And I don't think we can have a shiur next week. So Mitzvah Hashem the week after next, we'll pick this up with another.